Hi, I'm Ed Merrens, the Chief Clinical Officer here at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and it's great to be with you live. In the next 25 minutes, I want to give you some updates on COVID-19, our response, and focus a lot on the vaccine and new developments that a lot of you have questions about. Really appreciate you reaching out to us early on with some questions and things you wanted us to address, and we've collected all of those into some answers and things we're going to discuss. And then if you have any other questions during the course of this presentation, certainly send them to us and we can answer them live. So much to talk about, and I think it's probably important to kind of figure out where we are. First of all, it's been a long year. I first came to you all and talked about our organization's response across our system to COVID-19 almost a year ago. And I realize all of you and everyone in this country and across the world has been affected by the pandemic in some way. We've been a part of addressing health concerns and updating information and taking care of all your non-COVID related healthcare for quite some time and are committed to doing so. And this presentation should allay some fears and talk about some hope that we have for the future. First of all, I'm going to give you a lot of numbers, and it's just to kind of put things in context. First of all, we live in a country with almost 330 million people. 260 million of those are adults, and 68 million of those are kids. This is all really important as we begin to think about herd immunity and how many people we're going to have to get immunized, and that's about 230 million people, including a bunch of kids. And we'll talk about that and what that means. First of all, a lot of questions about why is it called COVID-19? Remember, this virus was identified in 2019. Even though 2020 seems like the year that would never end, it is still COVID-19 when we discovered this. The devastating impact of COVID-19 is that there have been 109, almost 110 million cases worldwide with 2.4 million deaths. That's clearly an underestimate because we haven't tracked everything across the world. In the United States, we've had over 28 million cases and what looks like about 486,000 deaths. When we really look at it, though, we think that's a vast underestimate, certainly the infection part of it. There are some estimates that say that we might have as many as 4 times that many people infected, or close to 100 million people in the United States who have been infected with COVID. Some got quite sick, and some have been relatively asymptomatic. But that is roughly a third of the population may have come in contact with this virus. What's also shocking is that the United States represents 20% of all COVID deaths in the world. 1/5 of every death has happened in the United States, and that's happened for a number of reasons. And if we were on the same level of infection and death rate as other industrialized countries in the world, some of our partners, we might have 40% less deaths. And we've discovered a lot of things about healthcare delivery, disadvantaged populations, and how we address a broad range of needs that I hope that we learn from going forward. And that's all we can do right now is go forward. And the opportunity to treat the virus, understand more, and vaccinate people is really important. And we'll talk about that. So where are we now? We know that deaths peaked early in February at a time when there was one day in the United States where we had over 5,000 deaths in one day. We know that's peaked. But now we're hearing more about variants like the B117 UK variant, or the B351, or the P1. These all sound like names out of a Star Wars movie, but these are variants of the vaccine. And variants are to be expected. This is not something that we didn't expect. In fact, with so much virus around the world, the opportunity for normal mutations to happen is a possibility, and some have the ability to infect people easier, and some may be more deadly. Some may be somewhat more resistant to the vaccines that have been developed. Right now, we think that the vaccines do have the ability to neutralize the viruses and even the variants. It may be less so with some of these, but this is something we'll continue to follow. It doesn't let off our need to continue to vaccinate people as much as we can. The numbers are clearly going down in the United States, and we think that is not necessarily due to vaccination. We've only vaccinated a little over 4 million people. It's probably due to continued masking, social distancing, and we're a ways away from some of the events like Thanksgiving and the holidays and the gatherings that have happened that turned out to be significant events that caused significant disease. The data from New Hampshire is really encouraging. Over the past month, we've seen almost a 60% decline in the 7-day average for new cases, 60% decline in test positivity, almost 60% decline in New Hampshire hospitalizations. These are great numbers. It's encouraging, but we have to keep up our guard. A number of questions. There's been a lot from the CDC around new masking guidelines. There's some new data around increased protection by wearing 2 masks. And certainly 2 masks can increase how much you're protected, even more than wearing 1. And more importantly is to have a close-fitting mask. And there's some information on our website and some of the communication that we've sent out, as well as with the CDC around how to keep the mask from having gaps at the side of the face by knotting the mask or making sure it fits the face well. And that's really important. At this time, we do not plan on changing our masking guideline across the Dartmouth-Hitchcock health system. We will be providing masks for people that don't have them, and everyone you encounter will have a mask. And also, everyone you encounter across the Dartmouth-Hitchcock health system will have been vaccinated. We're all here to provide safe and protected care. There have been some questions about quarantine. The CDC released some information recently on quarantine guidelines. And people that are 2 weeks out of their vaccination, when we think you're protected, will no longer need to quarantine if exposed to someone with COVID-19. This is really important for healthcare workers who are now protected because of the vaccine, but can go on to work in their everyday jobs taking care of patients. It's a lot of reassurance to them and for us to be able to take care of patients, whether it's an appointment for your child, an OB visit, or someone who requires care in an intensive care unit. Travel. There's a lot of question about travel. I think we're all itching to travel because no one's taken any vacations. But the recommendations from the Department of Health in both the state of Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as the CDC, is to continue to curtail non-essential travel. We're not sure about the immunity that we have with our vaccines. It's not 100%. At best, it's 95%. And it's probably reasonable to kind of limit travel for the future. If you have essential travel, please remember that masks are required. There are federal mandates now for masks on public transportation. And also in the future, we expect that you'll need a vaccine passport to prove that you've been vaccinated, likely, but more importantly, we'll need to have a negative COVID test. Let's keep dreaming about travel and a better summer to come. I want to get to some of your questions about vaccination and some of the general questions, and some of them around how did we develop this so quickly? How could we have done this? It can't be real. The reality is that this represents probably the most significant scientific effort the world has seen ever. This is collaborations across the world: United States, Germany, Sweden, China, Russia, organizations and scientists. And it really proves that science knows no bounds, is not influenced by the politics that have often had us at odds around how the world works and how the response to the virus has been perceived. There's been tremendous experience with other viruses. We gained a lot of experience with SARS years ago. And actually the work around mRNA vaccines, which we have with Pfizer and Moderna, has been in the works for over 20 years. We have a lot of experience with other virus, inactivated viruses or non-active viruses for years, and we've built on this. So a lot that has come to the fore in terms of the vaccines we have today is because of a lot of work that was going on. What we know is that the vaccine started in mid-December, December 14th, where was the first time healthcare workers were vaccinated. We know that 70 million of these doses have been delivered. 53 million of them have been administered. Some are still in storage for second doses. 38 million people have received 1 or more dose, and 14 million have received 2 doses. Who was eligible for the vaccine? And we think about the initial rollout was to address the 21 million people in the United States that are healthcare workers. 3 million people living in long-term healthcare facilities and nursing homes. Following that, it's addressing people working in schools, people in essential industries, law enforcement, and then addressing those with healthcare conditions. Every state has their own approach to it, but it's generally in phases. And in New Hampshire, there are phases in which there's a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. We're entering into phase 1B, where we're beginning to address the needs and understand those people who have health conditions. As we move into other phases, we get to people that are younger and don't have any comorbidities or healthcare conditions such as cancer, diabetes, or immunocompromise. Our hope is that we can get to immunizing or vaccinating the low-risk people later into the spring by May, which should make for a much more vaccinated population by the summer. So a lot of reasons for hope. Let's talk about this medically vulnerable population. There's been a lot of questions about how this will work. Across the Dartmouth-Hitchcock health system, we've employed the power of our electronic health system, and we have talented groups of information technology physicians and scientists and people that have been able to kind of get into our electronic health record and identify people that have come in for a cancer visit, have certain medications on that they're administered, that have certain diagnoses. And we're able to kind of query our electronic health record to identify those people that have health conditions. In addition, people's physicians have been identifying people that they think qualify. We report the people that qualify to the state. What you should know is that we don't send any of the diagnoses, medications, visits, or anything. It's just we use this information to identify those of you who would benefit from vaccination under this vulnerable population clause. After the state receives this information, you will be notified. We'll provide some information in your MyDH page, and there'll be some notification about a time for you to get vaccinated. So this represents the power of our healthcare system and our ability to kind of reach out and identify who most needs this information. All right, so let's talk about the vaccines. There's been a lot of information about what vaccines are out there. We have 2 vaccines right now. These are the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. We've had these since December. These are vaccines that are called mRNA vaccines. They're a little teeny bit of genetic material called mRNA, which is enveloped in a little layer of fat, a little oily droplet that protects it. It gets injected into your arm, goes into a cell, and the cell uses that genetic material, what it's coded for, to make spike proteins, which are those spiky little things on the outside of the coronavirus that it uses to attach to cells. Now, your body hasn't seen these before, and it knows it's an intruder and makes antibodies, which is your body's defense against intruders like the virus. So it gives advance notice so that when your body does come in contact with the virus, it's prepared. So these are mRNA vaccines. They have some unique attributes because this little fat globule that it needs to be transported needs to be kept very cold. So these need to be ultra refrigerated and transported. Other vaccines coming down the pike, and one that we're really excited about is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is made with a different formulation that doesn't require the same degree of cooling and actually only requires 1 dose. This is expected to go for emergency use authorization before the FDA on February 26th. You might say, what is emergency use authorization? Well, the vaccines for viruses have to go through a stringent process of evaluation. And if approved through an emergency use authorization, they still have to be monitored for safety and efficacy. I'll talk a little bit later about the process about how we go through developing and testing a vaccine. We have a number of other vaccines on the horizon. AstraZeneca is over 80% effective, Novavax. And what's important to know is that the other vaccines developed around the world, the Gamaleya vaccine with Sputnik components to it in Russia and the Sinopharm vaccine in China, are all very effective, meaning that the global response will also be robust. There are also many, many more vaccines in production and testing, and that can only be good because more vaccines mean more research, getting into more arms, and ongoing testing as we have to address and deal with variants. I would remind people again that you're considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after your final dose. That may be the second dose with doses like the Moderna or Pfizer, or after your first dose with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine when it comes out. In general, you don't have a decision about which vaccine you get. It's whichever one the state is delivering, and we feel comfortable recommending all of these. Let me just, for safety reasons, people had a bunch of questions about how vaccines are developed. There's 3 phases to vaccine development. The first is a safety phase where they administer a proposed vaccine to tens to less than 100 people just to make sure there's no untoward side effects. Phase 2 involves administering it to hundreds of people to see, when we give the vaccine, does it actually produce an antibody? And does that antibody work against the virus? The third phase is what's called a placebo control, in which we get a whole bunch of people and we administer some of them the vaccine and some of them a placebo. They don't know what they get, but we monitor them to see how many of those people actually develop the illness, like COVID. And all our vaccines have gone through this format and have proven quite effective. All right, what's it like to be vaccinated? Well, vaccinated for COVID is just like getting vaccinated for the flu, from my experience. Sometimes you can get a sore arm. Sometimes you can feel a little fatigued. Some people get more symptoms, and it's not uncommon for people to have aches, joint pains. You might have a little gastrointestinal upset. You might develop a fever, kind of like feeling like when you get the flu. This usually only lasts for about 24 hours. Only rarely, and very rarely, do people develop anaphylaxis or severe allergic reactions. And there's a host of other very rare but reportable things that have happened. Remember, the trials only included thousands and tens of thousands of people. Now we're administering it to millions, and we're learning more. So we're learning a lot more about this. People had questions about pregnant women and children, and I'll get to those and talk about those a little bit. Right now, there's no specific recommendations for pregnant women. It's important for any pregnant woman considering the vaccine or has comorbidities or other health conditions to talk with her provider. And what's interesting is that in the Pfizer trial, out of that Pfizer trial, there were 23 women that were pregnant that didn't know it at the time. And they tracked them through the course of the study, and it turns out 2 of them ended up having miscarriages or retained products of the placenta. But these were people that were in the placebo, not the treatment arm. It's a small amount of people, and it's just one index to say that we're continuing to follow this and track data as we move along. People have questions about getting the vaccine after having COVID. I already said at the beginning, there are some people that think that 70, 80, 100 million people in the United States likely have been exposed to COVID. We still think that if you've had COVID, you need to be vaccinated. We're not sure about the complete efficacy of even mild exposure, and we think the vaccine plus the booster dose, when indicated, is appropriate. Let's talk about some questions you might have. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of things that people are thinking about. I like to go back to Mark Twain's famous line, or a line attributed to Mark Twain, that says, "A lie can travel around the world and back again while truth is lacing up its boots." It's really the case. And we've had to, in recent months, really have to kind of examine where our information comes from and what to believe. There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it is frankly not credible. Go to trusted resources. Go to the Centers for Disease Control. Go to the state websites, both for the state of Vermont and New Hampshire. Go to the Dartmouth-Hitchcock site. These are sources of information and the truth. So people have been concerned about, will the vaccine make women infertile? Now, what we know is that the spike proteins on the virus may share some similarity with a small portion to the human placenta. This is where the umbilical cord attaches to the inside of the womb. What we know is that may be the case, but there's no evidence whatsoever that the vaccine has any effect on the placenta. In fact, we've not seen any effect of any cases of this actually occurring where there's damage or any problems or infertility. And in fact, the antibodies that are produced by receiving the vaccine are the same antibodies that are produced when people get COVID. And we've not seen changes or infertility in women who've had COVID. It's important to know that those antibodies are really the same. The vaccination gives your body advance notice in a safe way to be prepared. What about schools and kids? Kids end up being really important in all of this. So kids can get sick and spread disease, but less than 10% of the cases in the United States are in kids, and only a handful of kids have died. This is tragedy in and of itself, but there have been only 227 deaths of children in the United States. Right now we're facing rising instances of a rare syndrome called multisystem inflammatory syndrome, or MIS-C, in children. This is a syndrome that occurs weeks after a coronavirus infection and involves inflammation of the eyes, intestines, heart. It's very rare, but we're following it. That said, kids really don't seem to get affected that much by coronavirus. They may get it, but they may have more robust immune systems, or it may be certain receptors that they have in their lungs. At any rate, we're really thankful kids don't get sick. But they're really important in terms of immunization, and right now companies are working on strategies around vaccinating kids, entering them into trials, and going forward. I think what's really important is that we have to think about, as we think about vaccinating kids for coronavirus, we should also make sure they're up to date on their routine childhood vaccinations. Let me go back and talk a little bit about some of the other questions that are coming up here. One of them is how we'll be able to deliver vaccines. Right now, the vaccines are only being delivered under the state auspices. We're not able to purchase the vaccine and do things, and right now the state will roll those out, and there may be sites, and we're involved in delivering that, and volunteers, but that's how the virus vaccine will work for now. Previously in this, I might have said vaccine variants. I didn't mean to say vaccine variants. I meant virus variants. What's unique about all this is that there are a lot of V's in everything we're doing. So we have a lot of varieties of the vaccine, and we're really thankful for that. I want to go back to some of the things that we talk about with kids, and kids are linked with school. And I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about school. There's been a lot of concerns. 28 states now have recommendations to vaccinate teachers. And we know about schools is that we don't think kids are primarily the source of spread to teachers and administrators in schools. In fact, the biggest indicator of spread within schools is the spread within community. And when we have cases within schools, it's likely from adult to adult rather than kid to teacher. That said, we want to make sure our teachers are safe, and we want to make sure our kids are safe. So rolling it out to educators and teachers will be part of it in some states, certainly in New Hampshire. And we look forward to kind of expanding the pool of everyone who gets vaccinated. Another question here. People are asking about ibuprofen or Tylenol before or after the vaccine. Is there a time limit on taking these? Well, sometimes people get a sore arm, and some people have learned to take that before they get the flu shot. There's nothing wrong with taking ibuprofen or Tylenol in advance before getting your COVID vaccine, as long as those are safe drugs that you can take. And some people can't take those drugs because of other medical concerns. You should only need these for 24 to 48 hours to manage a sore arm or sore joints. And there are limits in terms of taking these drugs anyway, but they're usually well tolerated and shouldn't be a problem. Let me see about other questions here. I think there have been questions about how our flu season wrapped up, and that is certainly due to we're covering our mouths, we're social distancing, and we've also really controlled the pediatric population, which spreads the flu a lot, and kids have been doing things mostly remote. Another question coming through right now. Why is it important to continue to monitor for reactions or side effects after the first 24 hours? Should I contact my primary care doctor? We always want to know what people are experiencing. And as I said before, you can report this on the vSafe. There's a vSafe app that once you get vaccinated, you have access to a application that will query you every day on your symptoms. Really important to do that, and you can participate in science. But following your symptoms is also really important, so we know who's being affected and if there are more serious concerns. Again, we're not seeing a lot of this, but it is important. One of the other questions we've had from people is about people with epilepsy. Should they get vaccinated? The recommendations from the Epilepsy Foundation and guidelines is there are no contraindications for patients who have epilepsy. Certainly chat with your physician. The only thing is that We know that sometimes people who have an adverse reaction and get a fever can sometimes reduce the threshold for developing seizures. Again, no contraindication, but please check with your provider. Finally, how is it possible for someone to test negative for COVID before getting the vaccine, but then test positive after receiving it? Well, a couple things. We know the vaccine is 95% effective, meaning that 5% of the people may still get COVID, and that may be the case. What we know is that even for that small percentage, the illness may be much more attenuated or much less severe. So that's how things can happen, and that's why even if you're vaccinated, you need to continue wearing a mask, you need to continue washing your hands, you need to be social distancing. You can't just get together with all your vaccinated friends or those that aren't and celebrate. There'll be a time for that, but we're asking everyone who's been vaccinated to continue to continue to protect everybody else. So, I've gone through all the questions we received in advance, and I really appreciate all the questions that we've received in time. I want to thank everyone. Thank everyone for tuning in. I want to have everyone stay strong, wear a mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, and take care of each other. It's been a real privilege being here with all of you. And from Dartmouth-Hitchcock and our system, we wish you the best.